This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Well, welcome to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are here back in the studio here in Northern Colorado. Hopefully all of you are staying safe. This is a continuation of a previous show I did around a concept of box think. Box think being the combining of inside the box and out of the box thinking in order to give you a much more complete view and generate more ideas that don't create any kind of blind spots. One of the topics that we covered in that show, which was introducing you to the concept of box think, was around problem statements. Problem statements are absolutely critical in the innovation space for brainstorming. And so today what I wanted to do was to spend some time talking specifically around crafting problem statements, but not just problem statements generically. I've done this, over many, many years talking about this, but specifically around problem statements as it relates to inside the box thinking and out of the box thinking. So the whole concept here is what we want to talk about today is crafting well-written problem and opportunity statements that allow you to focus the idea creation. This is absolutely critical, not just the box think, but any form of brainstorming, ideation, whatever approach you use. You have to be thinking about the problem statement. Now, why do I think the problem statement is such a big issue? Well, what I would refer to, and this is my absolute favorite quote when it comes to this, is if I only had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. Albert Einstein said this. Think about it. People think of him as, being one of the smartest people in the world. His theories on relativity transformed physics. And when asked if he had 1 hour to save the world, how would he divide his time up? He would spend 55 minutes really thinking about defining and thinking about the problem, and then he would spend 5 minutes solving it. I'm going to guess that in most of your cases, in your specific case, that you would spend more time in the ideation than in the problem statement. I do. I have in the past. I have to constantly remind myself to take a breather, step back, and really, really think about the problem. Don't jump into brainstorming solutions. Really think about defining that problem. Now, what are the core elements of problems? Well, problems are you're trying to solve a problem, you're trying to remove a barrier, you're trying to improve an experience. That's basically the construct, right? You're thinking, okay, this is pretty simple. I can just whip out, a descriptor of, the problem I'm trying to solve or remove the barrier or improve, the overall experience. Now, that would be fine, but what I'm going to show you today is how I think about problem statements. And I'm going to share with you my exact templates, how I actually think about them, how I draft them, how they're worded, so that when I've defined the problem and I hand it off to another team, a team that's going to be generating the ideas or multiple teams ideating, that they have got this information that allows them to be much more effective and much more focused about it. And that is absolutely critical, because otherwise, if you don't have focus, if you don't define the problem correctly, then you end up with people just running around all over the place. And you tend to fall into two categories of ideas. You get ideas that are just really just small increments, don't make it red, make it blue. Or you end up with Buck Rogers, you have to violate a fundamental law of physics to make that idea a reality. Focus does apply some level of constraints, but well-defined problem statements is actually very freeing to the team because they kind of have those guardrails and they can innovate within those guardrails. So again, the core elements, problem statement, you're trying to solve a problem, you're trying to remove a barrier, or you're trying to improve an experience. One of the key characteristics, though, is it has to be solvable, right? Bertrand Russell, great quote. The greatest challenge to any thinker is stating the problem in a way that will allow a solution. Again, the greatest challenge to any thinker is stating the problem in a way that will allow a solution. You have to define the problem. It's not just about solving the problem. You got to define it in such a way that it's solvable. It's solvable within the constraints that you have, the resources that you have available. It has to be defined in such a way you can't create a problem statement that is, you have to invent fundamental science in order to make it achievable. Now, there are science research, you may want to go do that, but for 99% of innovators, you have to define the problem as something that is solvable. Now, when you're thinking about the problem, there are some problem validation questions that you want to apply. First off, is this actually a problem? Do you think it's a problem, or is it actually a problem? This is the, I don't know what I would call it, the gauntlet I'm going to throw down. And that is, if you think it's a problem, it may not be a problem. As I constantly say over and over again, you are not a proxy for your customer. I am not a proxy for my customers. I was not a proxy for my customers when I was CTO at Hewlett Packard. You are not a proxy. You have to go figure out whether that is really a problem. You may think it's a problem. You may have a hypothesis. Go prove the hypothesis by actually talking to people in the customer segment you want to serve. What's the level of importance? You may think it's important. They may say, nah, it's not an issue. I can get around that. How often does this problem crop up? What's the rate or frequency? If it's a rare problem, then there's maybe some little workaround to get around it. If it's a repeated problem that happens, weekly, daily, hourly, then that becomes, it starts to raise its importance of, yeah, that's a problem that needs to be solved. And then you ask yourself, why or why not? Why do I solve the problem? Why not? Why hasn't the problem been solved in the past? These are your problem validation questions. So what are the elements of a problem statement? The elements of a problem statement focus in 2 or 3 areas. Who? So who's the customer? Who's the person that's got this problem? What? What is the problem? What is the problem? And then the last is why? Why is it important to solve? What's the value? What's the benefit? Why should you or any other innovator spend their time thinking about it? So who? Who's the target? Who's the customer? It could be a broad customer segment. It could be a narrowly focused customer segment, but you need to describe and define the customer. You can't just say people have this problem. You need to say it's, the millennials as a target customer, or the boomers, or homeowners, or people who cannot afford to purchase their first car. Whatever it is, define the customer segment. What is the segment that you are going to go after? And then defining what the problem is. What is the problem? What's the problem they're having? And then the why. Why is it important to solve? So, this is all great. Let me give you an example. The example here is Middletown Hospital. So, this is a first draft of a problem statement. Middletown Hospital's current diagnosis protocol and tools are resulting in low diagnosis effectiveness and efficiency, causing up to 40% of its critical care patients painful extended treatment periods while substantially reducing the hospital's earning potential and resource efficiency. Whew. That's a mouthful. This would be what I would call a first draft, right? Who is it, right? You've got, patients, you've got the hospital, you've got the problem, which is causing up to 40% of its patients to have extended treatment periods. You got a problem, which this one's kind of a mix and match. So what makes on what are some of the considerations for statements. That is what you want in a good problem statement is you want it to be concise. You don't want to state or imply a solution, and you want to be specific enough to be solvable in the given time frame with the available resources and competencies. So again, concise, doesn't state or imply a solution, and yet is specific enough that you can actually create a solution. So how would you think this first draft ranks against that criteria? I wonder. Is it concise? Is it clear? Is it solvable? There may be too many things in it. When we come back, we're going to take a look at other drafts. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Killer Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. Continue our conversation on box think, specifically around crafting problem statements. So let's read this again. This is the first draft. Rough draft, I'm going to admit, right? This first draft, Middletown Hospital's current diagnosis protocol and tools are resulting in low diagnosis effectiveness and efficiency, causing up to 40% of its critical care patients painful, extended treatment periods while substantially reducing the hospital's earning potential and resource efficiency. Okay, multiple problems stated in here, multiple goals, multiple who's, right? So what would be a better next draft of this? So let's take a look at this next draft. Better example would be Middletown's Hospital current diagnosis protocol and tools are resulting in low diagnosis effectiveness and efficiency, substantially reducing the hospital's earning potential and resource efficiency. It's better. It gets a little, efficiency kind of, effectiveness and efficiency kind of pop out as the reinforcing things. I think it's better, but I think we can do better. What would be another great example? Another great example. Middletown Hospital's current diagnosis protocol and tools are resulting in low diagnosis effectiveness and efficiency, causing up to 40% of its critical care patients painful, extended treatment periods. Now, actually, I think this one is pretty darn good, right? You got the hospital, you've got the patient, you got the problem, which is low diagnosis effectiveness and efficiency, and why it's important. 40% of its critical care patients painful and extended treatment periods, right? That could be a very well defined example. But let's see, can we make it even better? So let's take this problem statement and make it even better. So here's another example. Up to 40% of critical care patients are experiencing painful, extended treatment periods due to low diagnosis effectiveness and efficiency of current diagnosis protocols and tools. Wow, that's pretty tight. That's pretty tight. Now, what's the one characteristic that you've seen through these four examples? Well, the one thing you'll notice right away is they're getting shorter. They're getting smaller. They're less words, better clarity. Typically in brainstorming sessions, someone spends 15 minutes, scratches out a problem statement, and everybody's off ideating. Spending time really thinking about the problem statement and trimming that down for efficiency, trimming that down for being extremely crisp is absolutely critical. In this case, this one was an actual modified, names changed, protect the innocent, but with some work that was done when we doing some problem statements or helping some organizations craft problem statements for ideation sessions that they wanted to host in multi-locations. So in this case, this last one became the one that they used. Up to 40% critical care patients are experiencing painful extended treatment periods due to low diagnosis effectiveness and efficiency of current diagnosis protocols and tools. So that became their problem statement. They ran a series of brainstorming sessions, and it had phenomenal results. So how do you go about writing your problem statements? So here is a problem statement template. Problem statement template that I use comes in two forms. First form is basically think of it as an ad libs. I'm going to give you the sentence with ad lib ports. You drop in your words, and that gives you a starting point. So in this case is the what, describe the problem. So the what, what's the problem, affects the who's the customer, describe the customer, that the results of which then describe why it's important to resolve the problem or benefit. So the problem affects customer, the result of which this is why it's important. Flipping that, there's another way to word the problem statement, which is who the customer is affected by what the problem is, the results of which this is the value or what this is you're trying to resolve. So customer first is affected by the problem, the result of which why is it important, what's the benefit, what's the value for solving this problem. So those are basically the two constructs. So this is a problem statement template. It is one that we use to start off with. Now we'll reword it multiple times and craft it in multiple places. But if you think about this as the problem statement, let's go back and take another look at this statement here, which is, up to 40% of critical care patients, so you're defining the who, are experiencing painful extended treatment periods due to low diagnosis and effectiveness and efficiency, right? So what's the problem? What's the problem, right? But you can solve that 40%, big benefit of current diagnosis protocols and tools, right? So those are all great. This is a really tight example of someone taking the template and tweaking it slightly and going from that perspective. So again, you can use these problem statements, templates. In fact, I'm going to post the templates over at killerinnovations.com. So if you want and you're listening and you're having a hard time following, the templates actually give you the construct. And in fact, the entire slide deck for this and all of the box think and all of those series of shows we've done are all available over at killerinnovations.com. So check that out. So now, what are you supposed to do, right? So you're coming into a brainstorming session. What's the thing you should be doing when you first get people together? I would suggest you get them together to draft the problem statement so that all the people that are in your brainstorming activities all agree on what the problem statement is. I've had history where you have some leader define the problem statement and you dictate it. Outcome not nearly as strong as if you bring people in and let them be able to help draft it. So what I would suggest is select your top problem. Just gotta highly define the problem. Then derive kind of the essence, the who, what, and why. And then set aside 20 minutes at the beginning of the brainstorming session for them to draft the problem statement. You can use the templates as a guide, whatever, but just have everybody individually draft that problem statement and then bring it all up together and consolidate. And again, I have problem statement templates, worksheets that we hand out, and I'm going to make that all available over at killerinnovations.com. You can hand these out in the session, have people fill it in, and then consolidate them, pull out some of the best wording, get everybody to agree, because now you bring focus. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back after this quick break. Welcome back to Kill Innovations. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. We are continuing our conversation with regards to problem statements, crafting really good problem statements when it comes to box think. Box think being defined as the this concept of doing both in the box thinking and out of the box thinking. And that basically is what it is. Box think uses out of the box and inside the box thinking to create a complete collection of ideas that lead to better innovations. It isn't just about thinking wild and crazy thoughts or just being stuck inside of the box of an organization or rules of an industry. You combine both of them and you actually end up with much, much, much better ideas, actually more ideas to sift through, and an increased likelihood of success. Now, in the previous show, when we introduced the concept of box think, we walked through some of the processes. Well, let's walk through some of those so that you get a little bit kind of a refresher if you've seen on the previous show, or give you at least enough foundation if this is the first time you're hearing about this concept of box think. So, the fundamental flow of a box think kind of process is step one, you have to define the problem or challenge statement, and that's what we've been talking about. What we've talked about so far in today's show is about the general version of problem statements. If you're just going to run a problem statement and just run an ideation session, that's great. If you want to apply box think, there's an extra step in here. So first step is define the problem statement. Number two is identify your industry and company constraints. What are the assumptions that your industry operates under? What are the rules your company, your team has to operate under? So now you're breaking that into two paths. Inside the box thinking, you have to operate within those constraints. Out of the box thinking is you want to operate in the opposite direction of those constraints. You actually want to assume that the opposite of the constraint is actually the case. So now you're on to two paths. You've identified the constraints. You're going to run a session inside the box where you actually define the problem statement that you have to operate within the constraint. And then you've got out of the box where you want to go crazy and get out of that box, get out of those constraints where you actually assume that it's separate. So now what do? You've got those and you're now on to two paths, in the box, out of the box. So what you do is depending on which path you're on, or if you've got two teams, you got one team on either side. In the case of inside the box thinking, you're going to cycle yourself through all those constraints. So you're going to come down, you're going to run an ideation session, then you go back up, you modify the problem statement with a constraint that gets embedded in it, and then you keep going. And then at the end, you rank all of those ideas. Out of the box thinking, you assume the opposite for every one of those constraints, and you modify the problem statement to deal with the opposite of the constraint. So you're forcing people to think not in the old way, but you actually are more explicit to break the rules or go to the opposite of any assumptions or rules around what your industry operates. Every time you cycle through from that ideation back up to out of the box or inside the box thinking, you're tweaking the problem statement. You're applying or removing constraints, because that then creates that environment with the team that's generating the ideas to have permission or to understand what the constraint is that they have to operate. You don't want to do this 30 times. You may pick 2 or 3 constraints that are really problematic or ones you absolutely have to live within, and deal with those accordingly. The key here is after you've done both the in the box and out of the box, bring the best ideas from both sides and rank them together. You're going to rank them against each other in order to try to derive what are those absolute best ideas. So, this is great, this is theory, but how do you craft problem statements for box thinking? I'm actually going to walk you through an example. This is a real example from my past, and I'm going to walk you through and show you what the outcome was. So in this case, this first draft, this is what I would call the generic or general problem statement. And this is, remember, I was CTO at Hewlett-Packard, so this is an HP example, and it's related specifically to laptops, the laptop business. At HP, when I was there as CTO, we shipped about 45 million laptops a year, largest laptop manufacturer in the world. And we stood back and we looked at the marketplace and we put out a problem statement that says, look, competitors are willing to narrow the markets where they aim their products, right? So think of Apple. HP at any given time had 38 to 40% market share. Apple had 2.5 to 3% market share. And those numbers really haven't shifted a whole lot, right? But competitors were willing to narrow their markets to aim their products at very specific customers versus making it just generic products, generic for everybody. Our laptop computers, they're highly personal items for our customers and therefore needs to be designed and marketed to target demographics. That's what I would call the generic issue, the generic problem. So here's a box think example one. This is the constraint that actually is an in the box thinking. So the in the box thinking. Again, competitors are willing to narrow the markets where they aim their products. Our laptop computers are highly personal items for our customers and therefore needs to be designed and marketed to target demographics to increase sales in next year's peak selling season. This constraint to increase sales in next year's peak selling season is a time constraint. The peak selling season for laptops is what? Christmas holiday season, between Black Friday, Thanksgiving, and December 25th. That is the peak selling season for laptops, consumer laptops, let me put it that way. So this constraint is great. You can come up with all the ideas you want, but it's got to be a product you got to build, and it has to be on the shelf for next year's peak selling season. That is a constraint. So that's one constraint. Second constraint is the top of the statement is the same, right? But the constraint is, and sold in a selling season that is aligned with those customer segments. So we wanted to create a product that was customized, but that we wanted to also not break the rule that peak selling season is always Christmas. Look at and figure out a demographic where you can sell those laptops in a selling season that is aligned with those customer segments. Segments may have their own buying season, buying philosophy. So the first product, new products coming out for the holiday season, just kind of part of the machine, but you had to come up with something new that had a targeted design, targeted experience, but you had to hit the season. This second example is come up with a product designed specifically for a segment, but then sell it in the selling season that makes sense for that target. So what was the product? What was the real product that came out of this box think example 2? Well, that was a product that was done in conjunction with Vivian Tam. And it's a fashion product. Think about it. Nobody's ever thought about consumer electronics as a fashion product. Vivian Tam, very well-known designer, an amazing designer who started off, and with nothing and built her entire brand and her business out of nothing. And we partnered with her to create these products. And these products actually got referred to in the marketplace as digital clutches. They look like a clutch, something that a woman would wear. It matches the dress. And in fact, Vivian designed a whole series of dresses that matched the design aesthetics of this digital clutch. And we launched it at Fashion Week, which is in September in New York City. And we didn't tell the press what we were doing. We just said, keep an eye out. There'll be a product announcement in the Vivian Tam show in Fashion Week. Vivian's models came out. First time I had ever been sitting front row at a major fashion show. The press came up running afterwards saying, hey, we didn't see the product. Where's the product? I'm going to go, you didn't see it? Check your cameras. And as a result of that, they went back and oh my gosh, we didn't even realize it. It was this merging of fashion and devices. So it didn't distinctly stand out. It looked like it belonged. It looked like it was cohesive. And that started a whole cycle. These products were the very first technologies in this class that had a fashion focus. And in fact, both products, there's 2 versions of the products, are now in the permanent collection of MoMA and on display and in the collection at the Computer History Museum. So MoMA and Computer History Museum both recognize these products and they went on to become phenomenal success. So this is an example of box thinking for problem statements. Well, welcome back to Killer Innovations. As we wrap up today's show, talking about box think and specifically about crafting the problem statement. Absolutely critical. I want to wrap this up, kind of re-summarize everything, and also give you some steps to help you actually figure out what problems you should go after. So, first off, let's go back to the quote that kind of started this all off. If I only had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. Albert Einstein quote. I repeat it quite often. I repeat it in every workshop I teach because I think it's worth reminding ourselves that we need to spend the time really understanding the problem before we expect a team to be able to go off and be effective at generating really good ideas. Now, that's great. It's great if you know what the problem is, and now you just got to word it in such a way that you can give to a team and be effective. But what happens if you're not even quite sure what problems are out there, what problems you should be thinking about? So in that case, here's what I would suggest is you need to ideate on the problems. Just like we would do ideation to come up with ideas to solve problems, here is the step at which you ideate problems. Now, this is hard, right? Because as soon as you start your ideation process, what do people want to do? They want to look for solutions. They want to come up with a problem and then immediately want to go into the solution. This is just about ideating problems. And you use the exact same process that I teach. Plenty of shows in the back catalog on brainstorming and ranking. So you ideate and then you rank. Ideate and you rank. Rank gives you establish a criteria to select the best problems. Now, when it comes to ideating problems, I would suggest for ranking that you use dot voting, and I'll explain that here in a second, rather than any kind of criteria, because it's kind of hard to define that criteria when you're just trying to define the problem. Criteria works really well for solutions. If you're ideating problems, I would suggest that you use dot voting. So let's talk through what that process would look like. So what I would say is you should set aside at least an hour, if not longer, but a minimum of an hour. And you're trying to identify top one or two problems. One or two problems that then you're going to then craft into problem statements. So you're not crafting, this is not voting on problem statements. This is simply identifying the problem. In your problems, you're looking for problems, friction in the systems, barriers, maybe unmet needs. People have got this need, but it's not met by a competitor or a solution today. And you should spend about 15 minutes just letting people go heads down and crank out as many problems. And remember, it's problems, not solutions. And trust me, when you run this, try to get this, team to do this, they will automatically, naturally slide into solution. Happens every time. So 15 minutes, you want them to crank out, they should be able to do 20 problems, 15 to 20 problems. You want them one per post-it note, not a lot of words. You want it very brief. And then 30 minutes of zoning or grouping the post-it notes. Everybody stands up, talks about their idea on their post-it note, why they think it's a problem, and put it up on a board. Then you're going to rank it. Everybody gets 5 dots. Everybody walks up. They can put all their 5 dots on the one problem, or they can spread it out like, oh, that's an interesting problem. That's an interesting problem. That's an interesting problem. But you need, 5 to 8 people to be voting roughly in order to get a good cross section. What you're trying to do is you're trying to take maybe a wide set of problems and get yourself defined down to a set of problems that you can realistically craft. Problem statements that are solvable. Remember, problem statements have to be solvable. They're not valuable if they're just crazy problem statements. So again, ideate the problem for 15 minutes, zone, group, getting everybody up, share, verbally say what their problem is, why they think it's important, put it up on a post-it note, group common ones together, maybe take a black marker, draw around the common ones, and then everybody steps back, takes 5 dots, walk up and vote. So 15 minutes ideate, 30 minutes zoning, 15 minutes ranking, 1 hour. You should be able to do this effectively in an hour. Then, once you've identified the problems, then what is it you have to do? Then you need to craft the problem statement. And like I said, I'm going to put all these slides, the problem statement templates, the worksheets, everything will be up at killerinnovations.com. You can hop on over and grab them there. Problem statement worksheet, you define the who, what's the customer, the what, what's the problem, and then why is it important, and then use different word structure, but try to keep it very succinct, really clear, as a problem statement, right? The best problem statement out there in the world, the gold standard, is John F. Kennedy's statement about putting the man on the moon. What was his statement? Before the end of the decade, we will put a man on the moon safely and bring him home safely, right? So the timing, before the end of the decade, that's a constraint. What is the goal? The goal is putting them on the man on the moon. Success gets defined by bringing them home safely. So, if you think you're really good, see if you can't create a problem statement for your problem that is a John F. Kennedy kind of level and quality of a problem statement. So, again, the whole concept of today was really around crafting a well-written problem and opportunity statements that focus on idea creation. I cannot underestimate the importance of a problem statement. If you want to learn more about box think or crafting problem statements, or get your team an experience about what does that really mean, check out Disruptive Ideation Workshop. You can go over to disruptiveideation.com. The Innovators Network, which I work closely with, they teach these workshops. They take the methodologies from my work, my book, the radio show, the podcast, and go out and help organizations and help teams. So check that out. Go on over to disruptiveideation.com. You can click on the button over there, fill out a form, let them know that you're interested in learning more about how to do that. And they are doing it as pure virtual workshops. So no need to wait until life gets back to normal. If you want more information, you can send me an email at phil@killerinnovations.com. You can hop on over to the blog at Phil McKinney, or you can text the word innovation to 44222 or innovation@killerinnovations.com. And with that, we're going to talk to you next week. Bye-bye.